Robin Siegel, our curator and archivist at the North Andover Historical Society for going on about 3 years now. She is also the director of the Boxford Historical Document Center. And without further ado, everyone please, a round of applause for Robin Siegel. That's good. Perfect.
Yep. Hi, I'm Robin, and today I'm going to be talking about preserving archival collections. So, what?
I just want to make sure that works.
Oh.
Should.
Yep.
Perfect.
Photographs, documents, and a little bit about books as well. So these are the main topics that we're going to cover. Degradation. So all these things are basically what they have in common is they're made out of paper, and paper is an organic material. Over time, it is going to degrade, going to return back to dust, and so all that we can really do is slow down that process. We're also going to talk about what level of risk is acceptable, because when it's your family collection, you want to be able to use it, you want to be able to enjoy it, but you also want to preserve it, and those things are kind of at odds with each other. So a little bit of talking about that trade-off. Also, we're going to discuss the interest of future generations, so how to pass on what you have so that it won't be discarded, what to do if you fear that your family legacy won't outlive you, and disaster response. So the main causes of degradation are temperature and humidity fluctuations. Also, the containers or materials that you're storing your archives in, acidic storage is a big problem. Also, off-gassing, too much light can cause damage, and of course, handling and other improper storage. So temperature and humidity. Objects really love stable climates, and a general rule of thumb is that if you're comfortable, the objects are comfortable. So that's why, we'll talk about later, you don't really want to store in attics or basements. You want things to be, about 65 degrees, 50% relative humidity. Ranges are okay, but you don't want large fluctuations. So especially, probably getting to be this time of year where you might have a really hot day and a really cold night. If you're not heating or cooling and you're getting these big jumps in temperature, that can be really bad for stuff. Poor conditions can also result in mold, accelerated decay, and critter damage. So like we said, avoid attics and basements, not only because of the climate, but also the potential for water damage. We had that year with all the ice dams, big leaks in attics. I know some of my stuff got wet, floods in basements. Mudrooms and entryways experience temperature swings, and if possible, you also want to avoid proximity to heat vents, radiators, hot lights, and fireplaces. Museums even try to avoid proximity to windows and exterior walls a lot of the time, but that might be pushing it a little bit for your own collections. Boxes can help create microclimates. So we use a lot of record cartons and document boxes, which can be purchased at gaylord.com or hollingermetaledge.com. This is what those look like. So record carton, document box, those are both acid-free storage containers from those two companies, and those are perfect for storing documents and photographs in. Modern printer paper that you would just buy at Staples, regular copy paper, that's generally acid-free, so that's safe to use. Old paper, non-archival tissue, cardboard, and wood, though, can be very damaging to papers and photographs. And old papers can also be damaging to themselves. So you want to use plastic sleeves to keep cardboard-mounted prints from damaging others around them. So if you have a whole stack of those old-fashioned photos mounted on cardboard, you want to actually put them in plastic enclosures, because the back of one cardboard could damage the face of the print on the next one. We also sometimes use sheets of acid-free paper. Again, you could use just regular printer paper. You don't need to buy anything fancy to interleave between pages of scrapbooks. And we remove old newsprint from between the pages of books to keep separate from other paper documents, because you'll have staining. And honestly, like if you have, an 1850 Bible and it's got some newspaper clippings in it, the staining is probably already there. So I have seen, a lot of people do remove those. The only thing that I like to be a little bit careful about with that is maintaining the connection, because sometimes the papers that someone would store in their family Bibles could be really interesting. They could be relevant. It might be like a little scriptural quote that they thought was neat, or a handmade bookmark. And so when I do remove those, I'll write on the little bag that I put them in where they came from. So, and try to keep them together if I can. So that in the future, people know that there's a connection between those things, because that makes them a lot more special than, just having a random bookmark by itself if it came out of your family Bible from whenever. We also remove old staples, paper clips, and pins because the metal will rust and stain the paper. You can replace these with plastic paper clips, which I'll show you. Staples should be removed by opening the staple ends with tweezers or a thin knife, or your fingernails if you have good fingernails. A regular staple remover will tear the paper. So these are the plastic clips that we use. I just get them on Amazon. And this is a plastic sleeve on a photo here. So many plastics are noted as acid-free. Like if you go and buy a scrapbook at Michael's or something, it might say that it's acid-free, but that doesn't always mean that it's safe for photographs because of the off-gassing of the plastic. So that would be good enough for paper, but for photographs, you want to look for something that says past PAT, which is the photographic activity test. So only plastic that's marked PAT is actually going to be photo-safe storage material. Wood storage units are not great because of the off-gassing of the wood itself or the paint and varnish that it's treated with. If you only have wooden storage, you can also use barriers. You can keep stuff in boxes or put down, some sort of lining over the wood to avoid direct contact between the wooden objects. Light has harmful UV rays that will fade writing and photographs and will also damage their physical stability over time and cause paper objects to become brittle. For framed objects, you can try to place in a location that doesn't receive direct sunlight. You can also use blinds. My mother has a really nice painting. She likes to cover it with a sheet first thing in the morning when the light is pouring in the window, or I guess she does it at night and she takes it down at 10 o'clock. Seems like a bit of overkill, but you can also rotate out stuff, so maybe just don't keep things on display permanently. So in museums, like the ideal is to try to rotate stuff every 6 months. Often it's a lot longer than that. But even if you keep something out for several years, if it's in your house, maybe even like 10 years, but then at some point just take it down, give it a break from the light. This won't actually repair the damage, but it'll just prevent it from getting worse. And then, of course, you can also have UV filtered glass or acrylic if you do want to have something up long term, which would help. You should also avoid spotlights or bulbs that produce heat. That's damaging as well. But honestly, with the new LED bulbs, it's not really too much of a concern anymore. Those are a lot safer. So handling objects frequently causes wear and tear. Organization, which we'll talk about a little bit later, can help you find what you need with minimal handling. Photographs shouldn't be rolled, and if possible, paper shouldn't be folded. So you can buy large flat boxes to store oversized photos and documents. If the photos and papers are already rolled or folded and they're too brittle to safely open, you should just leave them as they are. There are professional conservation treatments available to allow paper to safely relax and unfold. And they're not actually all that hard. Like, there are things that you can do. I mean, I wouldn't maybe do a homemade version of it if it's like a super important or valuable thing, but if you just have some old photos that are all curled up and you want to be able to make them lay flat again, there are ways to make your own. It's called a humidification chamber. So you're introducing indirect moisture to the object, and it can help to sort of flatten it out. You can send me an email later if you want to talk more about that and how to do it. But I would only do like a homemade treatment like that if it was something that wasn't super, super special. So this is one of those big flat boxes. We have a lot of these in storage. We try to avoid placing food and drink on the same surface where old photos and documents are resting, because mistakes happen, and it's really too bad when something really avoidable like that happens. We also use pencils instead of pens in the archive when we're taking notes, because it's really easy to accidentally swipe something while you're looking at it, and with a pencil you can just erase it. With a pen, your mark is there forever. Those white erasers, Magic Rub or Staedtler, those are great for removing pencil marks. The red erasers in the backs of pencils are usually going to damage the paper or leave lasting marks. So you probably mostly know this, but photos and negatives should just be handled either wearing gloves or just by holding the edges of the photographs. The oils on your hands are damaging to photos and negatives, and even if you don't see it immediately, if you're touching the surface of them over years, that oil will develop a permanent fingerprint that'll be visible. We usually use nitrile gloves here. They're a little more like dexterous than the cotton gloves. You can handle things better. They're a little bit stickier, so if you're trying to flip through photos, it's easier to grip. You can just get those at anywhere, hardware store, Walmart. They're not expensive. You can reuse them, probably use them for all kinds of other things too. So another thing is, because photos are often the most compelling and shareable part of a family collection, it's a good idea to consider digitization so that you can, flip through your photos, you can find them on your phone, you can share them with people, and you don't actually have to keep handling the original document. If photos are dirty, you can clean them with a clean, soft, dry brush by gently brushing from the center to the edges. This is scanning photos. So we wear gloves to scan photos. So photos do actually prefer a little bit of a cooler and even drier environment than paper because of the chemicals that are used to make them. And again, like negatives, even more so. Negatives they would probably rather be frozen, but we don't really have to do that. We store photos and negatives in plastic sleeves so that you can easily look through them without handling them or needing gloves. That's like another way to be able to view them with less handling and without damaging them more. If a photograph is brittle or flaking, you can store it separately in a small box. Photos and negatives should be stored separately from each other, as negatives emit chemicals that can harm the prints. Photos should be loosely filed and not tightly packed into boxes. You should also remove acidic paper and plastic sleeves from negatives. But like often, especially with the really old negatives, they're that sort of flaky paper that, it's like a brown paper. It's very flaky. You can photocopy or save that in its own little sleeve if it has like written information on it about the photograph. We often do that and keep it together. We photocopy them a lot, but sometimes we save the original if it's not in too poor condition. I usually use Gaylord for buying photo sleeves. They have I wrote this one down. Print file 6 mil polypropylene presentation pockets, 100 pack. Here's some sleeves that we have here. You can also sometimes find negative print sleeves they can be used for photographs as well, and sometimes they're a little bit cheaper. So then there's also some special types of photographs. When you start getting way back into the mid to late 1800s, You have ambrotypes, daguerreotypes, and tintypes. So the difference between these, because it's kind of confusing, ambrotypes are printed on glass. So when you look at them, the print is directly on the back of the glass. They're very clear prints and you can easily see the glass. Daguerreotypes are, they're reflective print on silver plate. So when you look at them, they almost look like you're looking at a mirror. You see yourself reflected back. They're really hard to get a clear photograph of because they keep reflecting you holding your camera. And tintypes are prints on metals. So these types of prints are often stored in decorative cases. You never want to take the actual print out of the case because the case is providing a nice little microclimate for it and it's actually helping to protect it. And you don't want to touch the surfaces of these because they're also very, very sensitive. Ideally store flat, and any uncased images should be stored individually in little clamshell type boxes. Loose tintypes can be stored in individual archival envelopes, so that's like archival paper envelopes, or in polyester folders and boxed with other photographs. Any restorations or repairs should be done by a conservator because, again, these are easily subject to damage and they're very fragile. What else was I going to say about those? Oh, yes. One thing that's kind of interesting about these, though, so a lot of the time, flip to the next. Okay, a lot of the time they're in a case like this. So when I said never open up the case, I'm talking about that the gold case there is actually a cased photograph that's set inside a fabric-covered wooden case. So these are two separate pieces here. You can actually pop out sometimes the little gold case there. And these photos, because they're usually like 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, like we don't always know who these people are anymore. Not all the time, but occasionally when you pop it out, there's actually a piece of paper or something underneath that gold case that might have more information. It might have a name, it might have the studio where the picture was taken, so you would at least know, oh, it's my family that came from New York. So that can actually give you some additional information. You have to be kind of careful popping it out, but yeah, that's actually a helpful thing. You just don't want to remove the photograph from the little gold case. So paper handling. Papers and books should be handled with clean, dry hands. You often see movies where they're handling really fragile, sensitive documents with white cotton gloves, and pretty much nobody does that because your hands just aren't fragile enough. You don't have enough dexterity to handle it without snagging the paper, ripping a tear. So we almost never use gloves to handle old papers because it's less safe than just using clean hands. Obviously, if the paper is contaminated by mold or animal droppings, it needs to be cleaned before being handled, and in that case, we do wear gloves. Glossy prints and artwork should be handled using gloves because these are more like photographs and skin surface oils can stain them. So if you had a pastel or a drawing or anything like that, you would actually wear gloves. If a book or multi-page document is actively crumbling, you can use a small metal spatula to help turn the pages. And you always want to make sure to provide support to an entire piece of paper when you're handling it. Don't try to lift it from the middle or with one hand. This is the little spatula that I use. And those little spatulas are very helpful for a lot of different things, actually. Sometimes they can even help get those photos out of the cases. They can be used to lift off photos or papers that are stuck into scrapbooks sometimes. You can sort of gently use them. So paper storage. Old inexpensive wood pulp papers, especially newsprint, are that very crumbly, acidic type of paper, and they decay very, very fast. So I sometimes will keep the original newspaper print if it has a photograph, just because the photos don't always, they just don't always, like if you photocopy them, they don't always come out with the best resolution. But our normal practice is to photocopy anything that's made out of newsprint and then save the photocopy and discard the newsprint, because the newsprint just won't last. So also, if you do decide to keep it, just like keep it, the newsprint photograph in a plastic sleeve, because it will otherwise stain the photocopy that you just made. So you can see on this sort of the active degradation along the side. It's starting to get really flaky, and you know that type of paper, like when you handle it, it just starts falling apart in your hands. That's what happens with newsprint, more recent newsprint, and some more recent books and stuff, and it's just, there's no way to prevent that. Again, you know, we've talked about, like with the Citizen, working on a digitization project here. We have a full run of the Citizen. And even once we digitize, we will keep the originals, just because photographing or scanning the photographs in the newspaper are going to be a lot higher quality than the microfilm that the digital images are going to be made from. There's also, we'll get into it a little bit later, but when you digitize something, you know, we have recommended DPI, so that's like the resolution that you would digitize at if you're, you know, planning to make a reproduction. But it's actually really interesting, because if you plan to blow it up, so you might have gone to our galleries and seen those huge curtains. A lot of those huge curtains are made from little photographs, like, I don't know, 2 by 4 inches. So when you're scanning something like that, you actually have to scan to a target size. So it is possible to get enough resolution to make something so tiny incredibly huge, but it's going to depend on what final size you want. So that's why, you know, if you can keep the original, it's really good, because if you ever did decide that you wanted a much larger copy of it, that's the only way you're going to get it, is by having the original. So old papers can generally be folded together, you know, in acid-free manila folders without needing to be stored in plastic sleeves. So an exception would be if the paper's falling apart, crumbling, or already in pieces. In those cases, a Mylar plastic sleeve will just give it a little bit of extra support and prevent further damage. Mylar sleeves are also something that you would get at Gaylord. Never laminate old papers. This causes discoloration and irreversible damage. You also want to avoid frequently folding and unfolding papers, which can cause cracks and tears on the fold lines. So when it's possible, you want to store your papers unfolded. Letters can usually be stored unfolded, attached to their envelopes with plastic clips. And again, it's good to keep the envelope, because maybe it has a postmark date when the letter's undated, or additional information like that. If it's signed, you know, hey sis, but then it has, you know, her name and address on it, that type of information is good to keep with the letter. So book handling. As with paper, clean and dry hands are best for handling books, and those same spatulas can be used for turning pages if they're very delicate. You always have to support the cover of an old and fragile book when you're opening it. You can make a book cradle out of some rolled up sweaters or dish towels so that the spine doesn't open too wide and crack. You never want to force a book cover open beyond what it's comfortable doing. So as soon as you start sort of feeling that resistance, just stop opening it, and that's when you can start turning the pages. Old books with green covers can actually be poisoned with arsenic, so you want to use nitrile gloves when you're handling them. This is like books from the 1800s. If it's published in the 1900s, you're probably safe. Books with unstable covers or bindings can be wrapped in acid-free tissue and bound with twill tape to help hold them together, or you can also easily make a little box for them out of archival folder stock. You can also purchase boxes to order online. So these are some boxed books on our shelf, and this is a book that's secured with twill tape. So usually I'll only make a box for a book if it's like the cover is pretty much detached, or you know it's about to become detached, like it really needs some extra protection. Then I'll make a box. If it's just, you know, kind of a bit rough around the edges, then, or maybe if it's just something like, you know, this directory that's kind of a mess and I don't really care about it, we'll just use some twill tape. Boxes are, you know, they take a lot of time and effort, so it's something that you would do for, you know, a book that's important or in really bad condition. So this is an example of a really fancy box. They don't really have to be that fancy. Basically, let's see. All that you really need is one strip of paper that would go from top to bottom of the book and fold around it on the front, and then another strip that folds the same way around the sides. And what we usually do is just buy the those little dots of Velcro. They're like adhesive Velcro, and you can just secure that top cover with the Velcro. And then I write on the outside of the box what's inside of it. So books in good condition are best stored upright on a bookshelf, not super packed in, but comfortably close together, using a bookend if they don't fit the shelf. You want to leave, so you know when you go to a bookstore, all the books are actually pushed forward on the shelf so that they line up in a nice even line. That's so that they can have some airflow behind them, which is better for, you know, preventing mold and just gives them a little more room to breathe. Really large books like Bibles, atlases, and other very oversized volumes are actually safer stored flat just because they're almost like too heavy to support themselves. Books on display should be supported by a book cradle and if possible covered with a UV filtered glass or acrylic case bonnet. Displayed books should regularly have open pages changed to prevent light damage and again avoiding bright spotlights. You do want to examine your books for mold growth or pest infestation. I'd say if you're like generally in a climate controlled, clean house, this is probably not a really big concern. I've only seen like mold and pest problems, you know, in buildings that are unoccupied or again, like attics, basements, something like that. If it's just on your bookshelf and you're regularly cleaning your house and you have heat and, you know, cooling and it's comfortable enough for you to live in, the books are probably fine. You do want to clean your books though. If you can vacuum them on low suction. If you put a piece of, if they're like really old sort of flaky books, you might want to put a piece of cheesecloth or screen netting, put it over the brush attachment with a rubber band or painter's tape, and that'll just make sure that if, you know, any big piece like flakes off, it won't just get sucked up. When you're removing a book from the shelf, you never want to pull it from the top out towards you. You either want to reach behind and push it to you or grab it from the middle and pull it out. A lot of damage to books happens when people pull the top of the spine and it will just pull right off. You also want to avoid homemade repairs on books because tape will discolor and damage paper, and often it can't be removed even by a trained conservator. So for scrapbooks, you want to interleave pages to prevent acid migration. So again, a lot of scrapbooks are made out of that sort of construction paper type of paper, which is very acidic. So if that's touching the photo on the opposite page, it's going to cause damage to it. The only thing you want to be aware of with interleaving, and the reason why you might want to consider for something like a scrapbook actually buying interleaving paper as opposed to using, regular computer paper, which is acid-free, is that you're adding bulk to the scrapbook by using that paper. And if you add too much bulk, again, it's just going to, add pressure to the binding, and it could cause damage. If possible, you might want to consider removing items from one of those self-adhesive albums they used where, it's like sticky paper with a sheet of plastic over it, and photographs and stuff would be put in there and they would just like stick. So those are really horrible because you have the sticky stuff and the acidic plastic, and it's just a bad situation, but you can't always safely remove stuff. So if you can't actually remove stuff, one thing you could do is just try to replace the plastic with some acid-free plastic. You could cut out the pages and stick them into a plastic sleeve, and then at least the fronts of the photographs are touching acid-free plastic. Sometimes you can use those metal spatulas to try to lift photos off of the adhesive. The only thing you have to keep in mind is that you're running the risk of, some tearing on the backside. And if you did have writing or something, it's possible that, that would get torn off too. If you do decide that you're gonna remove stuff from a scrapbook to put it into a better condition, you might want to maintain the original layout or photograph the original layout before you're removing stuff to preserve the creator's artistic and stylistic intentions. You can sort loose ephemera by size and type, so photographs, clippings, letters, and store those in acid-free envelopes to protect them. And you can use photo corners to reattach items that have come loose. So kind of like the same idea with Bibles, if things are loose in a scrapbook, just remove them, make sure they're in a safe enclosure, and then store them with the scrapbook. So this is an example of interleaving, and that's actual interleaving paper. So you can see it's really, really thin and fine, and it's still adding a lot of bulk to that scrapbook, but not as much as regular paper would. So for storing scrapbooks, small and medium scrapbooks can be stored upright on shelves, but really large, bulging ones, or those with a lot of loose items, should be stored flat in a box. You don't want to stack bulging scrapbooks, and you don't want to stack more than 3 scrapbooks in a box, just because, again, it puts pressure on the spines. If you have a special scrapbook, you can do custom-built boxes, similar to the fragile or important books, but you can also just buy scrapbook boxes. Those are actually fairly expensive though, so that's why it might make sense to just try to make your own enclosure. So again, books with loose or detached covers can be held together with that twill tape, and you want to just make sure you're handling them carefully and giving them a lot of support, so the bindings and covers don't sustain too much damage. So now we're moving on to the use versus preservation. Why do you want to keep and preserve this stuff if you can't enjoy it? And how can you enjoy it without damaging it? And how can you minimize damage? So preservation is really important because it gives us a tangible link to our past. It's something you can see and hold that remains in existence, even though the people that made it or whose lives are captured by it are now gone. If you don't preserve it, then the people in future generations don't get to experience holding or seeing it themselves. So that's why we want to preserve it. So we're going to talk about, or we did talk about some steps that can be taken to display photos and papers in a mindful, in a mindful way. So these are still going to result in degradation, but it just won't be as drastic. So to recap, we want to keep photos and papers out of direct light, use UV filtered glass or acrylic if you can, rotate objects that you're displaying, and you can back framed pieces with archival board or insert an acid-free barrier. Matting should also be acid-free for framed pieces. You can also consider using reproductions and then storing the originals. So I use a company called mpix.com, which makes really nice fine art print giclée reproductions. So we have like this map in our shop that's made by them. I've done photo exhibits, and they just look beautiful and they look like real pictures. And you can choose your finish and stuff. So that's a good way to display important stuff without actually putting the original on view and damaging it. Digital archives are also a great way to share and see your collection. And then with cloud storage, you can access them anywhere, which is definitely an advantage. You can use OneDrive or Google Drive, and you can back up on an external hard drive. And then these libraries can be shared and downloaded by anyone else who's interested in your family. Digitizing also makes it easy to get prints made, or you can start a family email chain, a Facebook group, an Instagram account, and you can share your history and encourage the interest of younger generations. You can also buy digital photo frames and link your cloud storage to your TV or computer to use as a screensaver so that your history is actually on a rotating display in your home. That's like a fun way to, keep it active and interesting and on view. Scrapbooks are a really great way to view your collection, but they're not really great for preservation. This is like when you make your own scrapbook. So you just want to be careful not to cut a photograph or document to make it fit in your scrapbook. If you're making a scrapbook, just make a copy of something and then cut the copy and save the original somewhere else. You want to use scrapbooks made out of archival paper and photoplastic. You don't want to use those adhesive pages. Use photo corners instead of adhering papers and photographs directly to the book. Adhesives are really tricky to remove, and they'll almost always result in damage if you try to remove them. Often the backs of photos and documents have other interesting information that someone in the future might want to see. We actually have some items here that were professionally conserved, which is great. They were really fragile, really old. And the way that they did it is they adhered it to like this rice paper. And on some of them, they just did that to the edges, which is cool because you can still see the front and back of the document. But on some of it, they adhered the entire thing to a sheet of rice paper. And so when you hold it up to the light, you can see there's something on the back, but you can't see what it is. And whoever did that decided what was on the front was really, really important. But like personally, I like people's random doodles and notes that like they make on the back that are not important, but like it's my favorite part because you kind of just, I don't know, like see the person being a person and not like a town clerk. So I think it's neat to be able to preserve the backs and just, things that were recorded by history but not on purpose. You can also buy little adhesive archival plastic pockets to add small items to your books if you want to add something that's not paper, like a button or a pin or a bookmark or just something cool that would be neat to have in your scrapbook. Most scrapbooks now you can also add little posts to the binding so that it's spacious enough and not squeezing the pages together too tightly. So you just want to make sure you buy enough posts so that the book can lay flat and the pages aren't bending out. You can also do a digitally published scrapbook. So that's when you kind of arrange, you have all your photos and everything scanned, you arrange it all online and do it that way. So how to pass on your history. There's a few things that go into being able to successfully pass on your history: labeling, organization, digitization, and published projects. So the most important thing you can do with photographs is to label them. So without labels, most people can't even recognize their own grandparents, aunts, and uncles as children. So this process happens really, really fast. You know, you'll see pictures of your parents and it doesn't seem like it needs a label. You'll see pictures of yourself as a child. It doesn't seem like it needs a label. But in like 1 or 2 generations, there will be people who have no idea who you're talking about anymore or who they're looking at. If you still have anyone in your family from an older generation, even if it's just your own siblings and cousins from your same generation, you might want to make a point of getting together and looking through your photograph collections to collectively try to identify as many people as you can. The sooner you can do this, and you know, the more people you can do this with, the more successful it is. And that is totally invaluable because once those people are gone, you'll just never know who these people in photographs are anymore, once nobody can recognize them. So like I said, label newer photographs as well. If you want your descendants to save them, they have to know what made the photograph important, why it was significant to your life, what it's about. So use first and last names, use locations, mention the event if you know what it is, like give it a reason to be saved. Old paper photographs or photographs mounted on cardboard can be marked with soft number 2 pencils. Newer photographs can be marked with special photo pens. We usually get them from Light Impressions. You can also use a numbering system and then keep a corresponding sheet with detailed information in the box. That might be helpful if you want to have like a lot of extra notes, and then I'll also talk about ways to do that digitally. So I guess here's an example of writing on the back of a photograph in pencil. And this was pretty well done. It says, you know, who it is and what their connection was to the person who was writing, and it has a date. Yeah, and then the only other thing I wanted to say about the marking of photos. So if you did decide to number it, that might look like, you know, the backs of your photographs are just numbered, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then on the corresponding sheet, you might write out like everyone's name and where they are, and you know, it's nice because maybe you could just do like ditto marks for like if it's 6 photos of the same type of thing, or they were taken at the same place. So you don't have to keep writing it a million times. So maybe that would make sense for you to do. Organization. Papers and photographs are much more likely to be saved if they look well cared for and are already arranged in a way that makes sense. Cleaning out or downsizing is really difficult, so boxes of miscellaneous items can be overwhelming. When you folder your papers, try to folder them according to family, person, or topic. Folder photographs according to family, person, or topic. This can be done chronologically as well if there are a lot of them. So, you know, maybe it's your mom's Miller family, and you have the photos from the 60s, and then the photos from the 70s, and then the photos from the 80s, and those are, you know, Miller 1980s, Miller 1990s, you know, so that it makes sense to someone who's trying to go through them. Books and ledgers can also be organized and boxed. You want to use non-acidic paper or folder stock to create bookmarks with labels. This can also be done with shelved books. So that's for stuff like, you know, if you have maybe a big collection of journals or something where it doesn't actually say on the spine what it is, but you want to like keep them on a bookshelf. You can just like use some archival folder stock or chop up an acid-free folder, and you can just make little bookmarks, and on the top of the bookmark, you know, you could just write what it is. And that's like an easy way to be able to see what it is without having to like dig through the book and try to figure it out again every single time, like what year and who wrote it and all that. So depending on the size of your collection, you might also want a key or like a finding aid to be able to more easily locate specific items. So this is best done as a digital file that's searchable and shareable. But you could also print a copy to keep in the front of your box. So I guess, if you have a family collection, and this is really like probably for larger collections, but if you had a very large collection and you want, and maybe like an important collection, maybe your family, had someone of significance and you have all of their papers, their personal papers, and you want to be able to search them, you could write a description like, this particular folder, here's the folder name, and this is what's inside it, and then go, item by item. So like box number 1, folder 1, Robert Johnson correspondence, and then letter from so-and-so to Robert Johnson, April 5th, 1905, and then, go through, enter all that information, folder 2, folder 3, box 2, folder 1, and then it would be searchable. So that's like what I'll have for like a finding aid. Usually not item level, it's usually more like folder level, but if you have boxes and boxes and you want to be able to look up, Robert Miller's correspondence, it's helpful to have this finding aid so you can just search it and be like, oh yeah, it's box 2, folder 1. It just makes the process quicker if you have a really big collection. So here's some foldering by last name here, and then it's like last name, first name in alphabetical order for the Ray family. Today it's trendy to embrace a minimalist lifestyle, so as a result you have younger generations that are often a little bit hesitant to acquire stuff, but they might be more open to digital preservation. This is also helpful for sharing stuff with large families where there aren't enough documents or photos to go around, so maybe everybody wants a copy, but there aren't that many copies. So generally speaking, you want to scan photographs at 600 dpi for preservation purposes. Documents are typically high enough if you scan at 300 dpi. So you might want to consider higher resolution for tiny photographs or for photographs with small and interesting details like signs, landscapes with people, etc. So this is sort of what I was talking about before though. 600 dpi is going to allow you to make a reproduction at the same size as the original and to keep all that detail. You're also going to be able to blow it up and see more detail at 600 dpi, but if you want like a really large reproduction, it's not going to be enough. So if you have a tiny little slide of a flower and you scan it at 600 dpi, it's going to be like, I don't know, like 29 kilobytes or something. But like if you want to really like, blow it up to like 16 by 20, you're going to have to scan it at a much higher resolution or to that target size. So Epson software is usually the easiest to kind of like do this with because it has a lot of flexibility and it's not just scanning at a random DPI. You can actually set that target size. If you guys have questions on this too, you can always like come in sometime and I can just like show you on our scanner upstairs how this works because it sounds a lot harder than it really is. Or watch a YouTube video or something, but I'd be happy to show you too. And then 300 DPI, again, like for a document is going to be enough that you'll be able to like easily read it and make out what it's saying. And it would, reproduce faithfully to the original size. So you want to organize your scanned files in folders to mirror the organization of your physical files. And I'll show you a little bit about how to do that. And also make sure to scan the backs of your photographs if they have any additional information. You also want to use a consistent naming numbering system, like the date and then underscore what the subject is, and then photograph number 1, 2, 3, 4. For dates, it usually makes sense to do year, month, day, because that will actually arrange them chronologically when you like pull them up on a computer. You can also use an Excel spreadsheet to capture additional information instead of trying to cram it all into the object name. So this is showing like the individual photograph, for a house might be named with the house number and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or if it were an individual, you might say Elaine Miller 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the folder level, in this case, we're looking at, different groups, but maybe you would have, one folder for the Miller family and one folder for the Johnson family. And then if you do this Excel spreadsheet, this looks super tiny on here. So this one is for recording people. So it has last name, first name, middle name, maiden name, date, where it was taken, any notes, just additional things that you'd want to say. And then we try to include like the physical location and also the digital name. So you're going to say like which box it's actually located in, and then which folder it's located in. And then, so for us, like our naming system was just box number, folder name, and then .0001. But let's say, you might say like Miller family, Elaine Miller, .001. And then that would be both your location and your digital file name. And then you could just, look back. So I guess in our case, we also have like accession numbers for a lot of these, which help to, locate which physical photograph is which. But I guess you have the digital file, so you can just look at that. And that gives you all the information. So published projects are another really good way to pass on your history. You can create prints or books of your favorite digital photos because no one's going to have the time or storage space to go through tens of thousands of digital images that we now take over our lifetimes. These can be easy to make books that just compile images of photographs and documents, or you can actually create a written narrative to go along with the archival or photographic content. Online book software makes this just like a simple drag and drop process. They're really easy to make. Sometimes formatting can take a little while if you want to include text. But another option is, depending on, are you just trying to make one, or are you trying to make several, and then to give them to the family? If you're trying to make a bunch of them, you really want to include that text, in the digital book. But if you're just trying to make one and have it printed, you could just like handwrite the text in as well. So a published book is just easier to store than a million photographs. It's easy to look at, especially with kids. You don't have to worry about someone damaging or ruining real photographs. And then you can also make tons of copies to share with anyone who's interested. So sometimes no one's interested. You can reach out to extended family. This takes research. If you happen to have, something that belonged to your second great grandmother, you might think you know all of your family, but she probably has other descendants that you've never even heard of. So, you can do some research and, try to figure out like who her children were and who their descendants are and who might still be living that would want the stuff that you have. You can also donate to relevant historical societies, museums, and archives. The only thing about this is that it does often require splitting your collection because a historical society or archive generally just wants stuff that's relevant to what it's collecting. So we only want North Andover stuff here. So if half your family is from North Andover, but then you go back a little bit further and they're from Staten Island, like we don't really want the Staten Island stuff. That's going to probably have to go to Staten Island, their historical society. You can also digitize and attach files to digital repositories. So Ancestry.com, findagrave.com, myheritage.com, all these websites have ways that you can attach images or images of documents to specific individuals. And once you do that, other users are going to be able, who are interested in that person, are going to be able to find what you've uploaded, and then they can save it, they can download it. So that's actually kind of a nice way, you don't have to really do the research yourself. You just attach it and it's out there for the world to find. You can also join online genealogy groups and offer what you have to interested individuals. There's a lot of groups out there. There's a lot of town-specific groups. There's regional groups. There's like pretty much any kind of group that you can think of. People are always, there's like lost photo groups. So there are specifically groups that if you have photos that you want to return to families, you can offer them there, and people will do the research and try to find someone out there who would want it. So there's a lot of ways to rehome your things responsibly and to find people who would be interested. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is disaster response. So this is what to do when some sort of damage has already occurred. And the biggest types of damage that we have are water, mold, fire, and insects or vermin. So you always want to sort of regularly monitor your collection and storage. That's the most effective way to prevent avoidable disasters. Check your storage spaces for signs of dampness and insect and rodent activity. Be sure your inspections are spaced throughout the year. Rodents are more active in the winter. Insects typically cause more damage in the warmer months. You have condensation or leaks from ice dams in some spaces during the winter, floods during the summer. You want to avoid homemade repairs, such as using tape. Consult an expert or scan items and perform digital repairs. That's an option if something's been badly damaged. There's a lot of online groups that offer this service for free. You can see the Facebook group Photo Restoration Free Service. So, you might have a photo that is half gone because of water damage. Like, there are people that will digitally restore it so it looks whole. And they can do pretty amazing stuff. If you do experience a flood or a leak and everything is still wet, your priority is to dry everything out as soon as possible. So you want to separate your photographs and papers and lay them flat to dry. You can use a fan to help move the air around. If you can't deal with the problem immediately, place the photographs or documents in airtight plastic bags and freeze them until you're able to take the above actions. If you do allow photographs and papers to dry while touching, it'll often fuse them together, and that can be a much harder problem to fix. Photos that are already fused can sometimes be separated after being frozen. So if they're already fused, you can stick them in a freezer for a few hours and then try to separate them using dental floss or a metal spatula, but damage might still occur in that process. And if the damaged items are very valuable, again, just consult a conservator before doing anything. Mold is very dangerous and damaging, but you don't necessarily need to throw out things that are contaminated with mold. You can always consult a conservator if you want professional help. Active mold is paste-like, and it's going to smear if you touch it. Inactive or dry mold is sort of feathery looking and powdery, and it brushes off like dust. Mold likes moisture, so it will die off and become inactive if you remove the object to a dry environment. Once it's inactive, you can clean it. However, the spores can reactivate easily if it ever gets wet again. So you want to be careful with mold because you can deal with it yourself. You can clean it, but let's say something else happened. You let it be in a damp space in your basement. Not only would it come back, it could also contaminate nearby objects that were not previously moldy. So you do want to be careful with that. So this is an example of a photograph of mine that got moldy. Somehow it got like put into this like old computer box with a bunch of really my most important papers, and then one of us saw the computer box somewhere and was like, oh, this needs to go with all the old boxes of TVs and random things that we own and have boxes for down in the basement. So not realizing that this box was full of really important papers and photographs, it went to the very bottom of the pile of boxes in the basement. And of course, there was some sort of water that got in there, and it got super moldy. So to clean mold, you can do this yourself if you have the right equipment. And again, just when you're storing it after it's been moldy and then cleaned, do keep it separate from other things that were not contaminated. So you want to wear a mask and gloves and plan to wash your clothing immediately after exposure, preferably clean outdoors or in a well-ventilated room if you're cleaning outdoors, obviously on a very dry day with not a lot of wind. You'll need soft paint brushes and an adjustable HEPA-filtered vacuum set to its lowest setting. So Neil Fisk or Mealy are usually the two vacuums that have that option. Gently brush the mold into the nozzle of the vacuum. You go over the entire object, both sides, interiors of folds, creases, envelopes, etc. Envelopes, I learned, are very difficult to clean. So if you don't need to keep them, just photograph them and then discard the original. Keep a printout of the photograph with the contents of the envelope. And like I said, box these objects separately so that they can't contaminate the rest of your collection even after they've been cleaned. Fires are a worst case scenario because they're often a total loss between the fire, smoke, and water damage. If it's just water damage, you can address it like we talked about. Smoke odors can be removed with the use of an ozone machine, but you have to follow the manufacturer's instructions. They can be deadly to people and pets if they're used improperly. So you're going to be using it in an enclosed space, and everyone needs to leave that space, let it do its thing, and then also leave a number of hours in between when it finishes the process and when you re-enter the space and ventilate it, because otherwise there's no oxygen there, and that's why it can be deadly. You also have to be aware that there are some pigments that can be damaged by ozone. So, you know, if you're talking about a bunch of letters, maybe, that would be fine. But artwork is, especially like paintings, can be damaged by ozone to the extent that I think we learned in school you don't even want to like hang a painting above like a copy machine because copy machines emit ozone. In the case of total loss, you want to contact both close and distant relatives to try to obtain copies of photographs that you may have lost. Genealogy and newspaper websites can also be a good resource for photographs and documents, and you can always contact me for more information about how to locate those if you'd like to know more. Insects and vermin. So moisture and dust create friendly breeding grounds for hazardous insects such as silverfish. Insect damage can be visible as an active infestation with live insects. It could be visible as holes, cast or shed insect skins, moth webbing, or frass. Those are insect droppings. They look like sawdust. In the case of an active infestation, you want to put the infested objects into a sealed plastic bag and freeze it for at least 3 days and up to a week. After defrosting, gently clean the object with a soft brush. Previously damaged objects can be cleaned and moved to a more suitable environment. Freezing works wonders with insect infestations. It will kill not only live insects, it also kills eggs. And then you just want, the cleaning is mostly just because, again, like insects enjoy that kind of like dirty environment. You know, some insects will eat other dead insects, and we want to avoid that. So that's why you want to clean it. Rodent droppings are a health hazard, so you want to wear gloves and masks while cleaning. Try to locate and block any holes used as access points by rodents. vacuum clean objects and buy new storage boxes. And objects that are properly boxed in sturdy archival boxes are far less likely to encounter this type of damage. I do still sometimes find insects in archival boxes. They can get in pretty much anywhere, but rodents tend to stay out. And here are some papers I had to go through from someone's house that had rodent damage. That's really gross. And that is the end. Does anyone have questions? Yeah.
Let me, please, I'm going to hand you a microphone. Please speak directly into it for the benefit of everybody watching in the future on this presentation that, if I did properly, is actually archived on the internet. So I saw everybody taking notes. Fantastic. If you feel like you missed something, this will be available on our website. Who had the question?
You mentioned book bindings. So if you have a deteriorating leather book bindings that's becoming crumbly and orange, any advice?
If you actually want to like fix it, you would have to see a conservator about that. That's called red rot. And honestly, like for those types of things, that is a situation that I would use one of those like homemade boxes so that it doesn't get everywhere and like stain all the stuff around it.
Somebody else want a chance?
Robin, what would be your suggestion for digitizing books?
I mean, if it's like a historic, like, are you talking about like a journal or something?
Yeah,
or?
something that you don't want to unbind, but
Yeah, I mean, so if it's just a historic book, most of those are already digitized. But if it's something like a journal or like a unique object, there is a new type of scanner. I was just talking to someone, about it. I don't know how it's pronounced, but it's spelled CZUR, Seashore, something like that. And so basically, it is a book scanner. And what's neat about this type of scanner is that it sort of looks down at the book, and it works really fast. So you hold the book open, you turn the page, you just push a button, and then move on to the next page, push a button. So it's much faster than conventional scanning. The other neat thing about it is that, well, there's two neat things about it. One is that it corrects for a book doesn't lay perfectly flat. So it corrects the depth of field so that everything's in focus, even though the book isn't perfectly flat. And then the other thing is that if it were a print book or a printed document, because it can also do documents and photos, it actually does have a built-in OCR, an optical character recognition software. So it's searchable. So let's say you were scanning, like he wanted to scan a bunch of newspaper articles. Like once you scanned them, you could actually just type into your computer a keyword and it would be able to find that in all the articles that you scanned.
I have a lot of family photographs, mostly from the late 19th century, and they're very sturdy on cardboard. So I saw your archival box with folders, so I was thinking, well, that would be ideal to put them in folders.
Yeah.
But then should I store the box flat instead of up?
Nope, that can be stored upright.
Pardon?
So that could be stored upright, not flat.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Questions?
Going back to daguerreotypes. So you have a glass sandwich that has the image inside it, and I'm tell me where I'm wrong here, but I think it's taped at the edges usually.
Yeah.
And then the gold oval that you had a picture of, that's a separate piece that sort of floats on the surface.
Well, usually the gold, so you have a piece of glass. So the daguerreotype itself
It's two pieces.
is
of glass,
it's two
isn't it?
pieces, right?
Yeah.
So it's glass with a metal backing on it, and then, no, it's one piece. It's just glass with a metal backing on it, okay? And then the gold kind of goes around it, and then there's usually like a piece of cardboard or paper or something on the back, and the gold is folded around that piece of cardboard or paper.
Okay, and then I know I've already done that. Pry the sandwich out of the felt case or velvet case,
Yeah.
I guess they are. Now, if the surface of the glass that you're facing, can you clean that glass?
Yeah, you can clean it, but you want to be really, really careful. So you would never.
No cracks. No
What?
cracks. Make sure there's no cracks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't use any chemicals on it. And I mean, like, don't spray anything directly
Yeah.
on it either. So if you're, you could spray a little water or something onto a cleaning cloth and just like gently clean it that way.
Okay. I just want to comment about the example you had of how to mark a photo, woman's full maiden name, how they're known, birth and death dates, particularly if a woman's name has been reused
Oh,
through the
yes.
family.
That's a good point. Yeah, and especially for the older photos,
Yeah.
definitely.
Well, for any photos, if you want to make one now that you
So
can,
the thing with the
somebody's gonna
photos
see.
now, and again, it's just the volume. So, you started having, even in the 50s and 60s, like there were like a good number of photos. You have a little kid running around and there are like, maybe like, there are a lot of photos. So, it's either you need to select a few of your favorites and get rid of the rest, or, you might mark that, like, you're just realistically, like, you're not going to mark all of that information on every single photo when you're talking about like thousands of photos. And people, like, if you have the information, and that's why you maybe want a finding aid or something like that with that extra information, or, I would sometimes mark that on the folder. So like if I had a folder of photos of me, I would have like my name, let's say, well, not me, but my grandmother. I could put like her name, birth, death date on the folder, and then all the photos inside, you could just mark her name on it. You wouldn't need all the information because it's somewhere, easily findable.
Robin, one thing you didn't mention about digitizing is photography. In lieu of scanning or photocopying or something, is that an alternative for delicate materials to photograph them?
Yeah, some stuff would have to be photographed if it's like too big to scan or too fragile
Right.
yeah.
When you scan materials, what does that create? A JPEG or a?
You can scan it however you want. You could
Okay.
do it in any format.
Okay, so
You select it.
okay, so it would be the same as photographing it if you, yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
When it comes to storing Polaroids as opposed to photos that have been processed in a darkroom, would you change that process at all because the chemicals from the Polaroid are potentially there? No, same thing?
No, same thing. And the PAT plastic should work fine. Yeah.
Okay. And follow-up question. I've had the opportunity to use a 20 by 24 Polaroid camera, and I have huge prints. Are any of those sources that you have for like storage have anything that big? They're uncut, so they're quite large, but
20 by 24.
yeah.
So probably what you would do with that, Mylar is what we usually use for like really oversized stuff. Mylar, you can Usually what people do is it can come in like really big sheets or rolls. You would cut 2 pieces. You get double-sided tape. They make like a, archival double-sided tape we get from Gaylord. And you run that around 3 edges.
Like
And
a
then it just,
sleeve, yeah.
yeah, it makes like a sleeve. Or like alternatively, you could just, and that's nice, again, for just like handling. But alternatively, I think they like make, or you could make your own, like folder stock comes in really big pieces, and you could just make like folders.
Yeah, I'm a little scared to open them. I haven't opened them in a while, so
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Do you have any suggestions regarding wedding albums? I have my parents' wedding album from 1949. I have my husband's parents' wedding album. They're beautiful. They're a piece of history. I'm not going to take the photos out of them, but I'm guessing that my grandsons aren't going to want these.
Yeah. So again, like if there's no one who's like a descendant that wants them, like you could try asking a historical society and see if they would take them. The nice thing about that is because if a couple generations down the road, someone decides that they do want to see them, they'll still be there and potentially, they could locate them.
Would that work the scanning that you would talk about for books? Would that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that type of scanner is like exactly like perfect for scrapbook type of things. Yeah.
Any further questions? If there are no further questions, please another round of applause for Robin Siegel.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming this evening.